All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's Zinc webinar. My name is Nicole Sanders, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. So today's webcast is the fourth in our Communication Matters webcast series. We've been hosting these for the last couple months, and we'll have a couple more in the future. If you want to see what other topics we've covered, those are posted on our Zinc website. But today, our webcast is entitled When You Can't Afford to Have Teams Communicate on Unsecure Apps. We'll be discussing sort of the unique needs of deskless workers within companies and just what to consider when evaluating solutions that those people need to communicate on a regular basis. Our webcast is scheduled to last about 30 minutes today. We are recording today's presentation and we'll make it available to you in the next 48 hours. We are going to be taking questions at the close of the session, but you're welcome to submit those throughout the presentation. You can do that by clicking on the orange arrow on the right side of your screen and submitting those questions. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers today. I'm sitting here with John Stedick. John is Zinc's Chief Product Officer, as well as Evan Owen, our VP of Engineering, or our Zinc security expert, as we like to call him. John will start off the presentation by talking about those needs of employees who are out in the field, not in front of computers, but in front of customers, and what they need to communicate to get their job done on a daily basis. We'll then transition to Evan, who will cover the key pillars of a secure communication platform, and then come back to John, who will just give a brief overview of the Zinc communication platform and actually show you the administration features of that. So, John, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone, for taking time of your day to join us. What I want to get started with is just talking a little bit about how Zinc works and specifically some of the problems that deskless workers face when trying to communicate. What we try to enable at Zinc is allow you to create a full communication network within your organization so information can move seamlessly between different people that are out in the field or working around the property or back in the office, and trying to connect all of those people to really create one connected team. But it's very important that we do that in a secure and compliant way. So this is something that really is ready for the enterprise. And we see communication is really, it's really essential and critical to able to really perform any type of job function. Whether it's a case of you need to communicate because you want to share knowledge or gain different knowledge, you've got questions on how to do something, you want to ask someone, being able to get that real-time response is critical to allow you to move your job forward, as well as being able to help drive workflow. If I'm executing a process and I've got a question or I want more information on that workflow, being able to communicate back and forth rapidly in real time with people that have knowledge about the particular problem or topic that I'm discussing is really, really critical to help people, again, progress their job faster and become more effective and efficient in their job. So we like to think of Zinc provided a communication platform that really greases the wheels as to how workflow and knowledge are shared within an organization. Now, the deskless worker itself actually has some specific and unique communication needs. So first of all, I'd mentioned the term real time. A lot of the times when people are out in the field, they're in front of customers, they're executing many jobs at the same time, or different tasks being executed quickly under different time pressures, they really need to be mobile. They're obviously not tethered to a desk. They don't have access to a computer. So accessing all of this from a mobile device is critical, and they need information real time. If you think about an example where you have a field technician who is out servicing a customer and they need information, they're in front of the customer and they need it right then and there. Or a hospitality worker who is tasked with delivering different items to hotel rooms, and they've got a question. They can't wait for the answer. It's all about that real-time communication. And of course, because this is communication capability that's used out in the field and out at the edges of your organization, it needs to be easy to use. It's something that you don't want to have to invest a lot of time in training people how to use. They need to be able to just log in, start using it, and understand the basic paradigms of how it actually works. Also important is different modes of communication are very appropriate for different types of communication. Sometimes it's very efficient to bang out a quick text to be able to send a message over to someone or to a group of people. Other times, a conversation needs a bit of a phone call and this audio back and forth. Other times, being able to push a button and just do an actual push-to-talk conversation is a better way to be able to communicate. Or maybe there's a notice that needs to go out to hundreds or thousands of people at one time. Being able to broadcast information out to those people is critical. Now, a lot of the times, people have to work across different apps to be able to do that. Zinc brings a unified view of that as to how you can bring all those modes of communication into a single app. And then importantly, what we'll be talking more about today is this idea of how this can be centrally administered to bring a greater deal of security within your organization. And of course, ways to be able to connect those apps to the workers' actually daily tasks. So the conversations that they have can be more in the context of the work that they're actually doing. When we think about some of the traditional enterprise communication systems like email, for example, or in some cases, walkie-talkies that get used in job sites or hotel properties, those enterprise communication systems haven't really evolved to meet the needs of enterprises with teams of deskless workers, whether that's hotel staff, home healthcare nurses, construction workers, field service technicians, maintenance teams. Those traditional enterprise communication tools really haven't evolved to be able to keep up with the needs of this real-time mobile-first communication mechanism. And so what ends up happening? A lot of teams are now turning to consumer different apps to allow them to be able to connect and coordinate within their team. So they're looking at creating these ad hoc systems where they'll text some people they know, or maybe there's this rogue Facebook group that exists, or they hop on WhatsApp. So it's really about finding a way to communicate that is effective and efficient for them to get their job done. And they're thinking about how to optimize the local communication within their team. And so they turn to some of these consumer tools that bring some of the characteristics that they're looking for. In fact, over 80% of organizations claim to be using consumer apps in their communication. So this is actually quite a widespread thing that starts to happen, where people are finding these ad hoc ways to communicate because traditional enterprise communication systems don't provide the mechanisms that they actually need. So when we think about this, there's really some good intentions here. They switch to these consumer apps, or some of the just texting back and forth, and likely all of you on the phone do this today. You text with coworkers from time to time. It's because it's real time and it's mobile. It's easy to use. We like to think of communication as like water. It flows through the path of least resistance. So if someone can find an efficient way to be able to get the information they need, they're going to go opt for that way of communicating. However, that causes some problems when they think about doing this at the consumer app side. So first of all, those consumer apps don't traditionally integrate into your workflow. They're not connected into your business systems that drive you every day. You have no analytics, you have no understanding as to how those systems are being used. What are people actually talking about? What are the important conversations that people are having? There's typically not an easy way to be able to share content and knowledge in a centralized way. And as I mentioned, these consumer apps end up being tailored more at the local optimization. I have a small team and I just want to be talking with this small team, so I'm using a tool that works for my small team. But in a larger enterprise environment where you have lots of regional teams all over the place, it's very hard to start to share best practices and connect people across those different little nodes or little mini networks of communication, because there's not one unified system to be able to communicate on. And now a real key part of today's conversation is that a lot of those consumer apps, or all of those consumer apps, really provide no mechanism for central administration. They're not compliant with your corporate IT policies, and a lot of them end up being unsecure, which creates a lot of risk for the organization. So what we want to talk a little bit about today is a little bit more detail about how to be thinking about security in your environment and how you can onboard a real-time communication platform like Zinc to be able to bring all the benefits of real-time mobile-first communication, doing that at the enterprise scale in a connected, integrated way, while also now providing sophisticated security and administration capability that's much needed for you to be able to roll this out in an enterprise environment. So Evan, do you want to talk a little bit more about the way that we think and the way the industry thinks about what really makes a secure and compliant platform?
Sure, thank you. So when you think about security, especially for a consumer app, you may only think of one or two things as far as being secure. You've probably heard of encryption. There are certain apps that claim to be secure in different ways. We actually think of security in a very holistic way, and there's a lot of things that come into play when you want to start looking at a solution that meets the needs of your organization. And encryption is one of those things, but there are a lot of other elements to being secure. If you think about it, really security comes down to having your data where you want it, when you want it, and then also, of course, not having your data where you don't want it. And that's really key to understanding these pillars. So first of all, availability. If you look at these three pillars here, availability there at the top, it's not something you may think of right away, but really it's key. And that is basically making sure that your data is available when you need it. Imagine your data in a consumer app. It might be sitting on one of your employees' devices. They may be sharing it with somebody else on your team, or they may actually be sharing it with somebody off your team. If that employee is to leave your organization, that data is still on their device. And you may not even be able to get at it. It might be an important piece of information. So that data is actually not available to you at the organizational level. So that's one thing we really look at, is making sure that your data is there and available. And in the case of some sort of failure of the service, can you get at that data? So we actually look at things like disaster tolerance and making sure that our platform is fast and always online when you need it. And then down in the bottom right, integrity. This basically comes down to making sure that when you get a message, you know that it's coming from the right person, it is who they say they are, and then that data doesn't get changed inadvertently or maliciously in the future. So you can verify that the changes that happen are actually authorized and can be traced back. This is really important if you need to do any sort of auditing for compliance purposes. And then finally, this is the one that you probably think about most often, confidentiality. This basically means that the data that's really crucial and sensitive to your organization doesn't get where it shouldn't be. So part of this is encryption, and of course we do provide strong encryption, but the other aspect that's really crucial is access control. So giving you the power to provide access to data that's people that should have it, and then also revoke access when somebody either leaves your organization or should no longer have access to that data. And then of course, having a secure data center and making sure that there's physical controls preventing access to the actual servers that store the data. And finally, data retention control, meaning you have the ability to tell your service provider when to purge data that's no longer needed. There's no risk of leaking data if the data isn't actually there. And so one thing Zinc provides is the ability to get rid of data after a certain retention period. And so those three pillars become the foundation of the security, the security profile that Zinc provides for the platform. And it's something that we would recommend anyone looking at when they're considering a solution provider for any of their services. So for Zinc in particular, these are some of the top things that we look at when we're basically planning the security of our platform. So first of all, we have an ISO 27001 certified data center. That basically covers the physical security of the servers where all of Zinc data resides. It certifies that there are things like biometric security controls and video cameras that are covering and monitoring all of the facilities. Of course, we have strong encryption in transit and at rest to make sure that the data can't be observed or tampered with while it's traversing between devices or sitting on our servers. As I mentioned, we provide custom data retention control, so you can actually control when you want data to be purged, or you can choose to keep it for a specific period of time in case you need it for audit in the future. We offer secure multi-factor authentication. This is how we verify that anyone who's sending a message on Zinc is actually who they say they are, and they're using an account that they're authorized to use. And we offer centrally managed user access. So If you want to automatically provision users when they join your organization, we can connect to an Active Directory instance, which will automatically give users the right access, and then when their access is revoked, they can be removed from the Zinc conversations that they were in previously. And John will give a demo of how this works in a minute. And finally, we have externally audited security controls, which means we actually open up our process, we document it, and we allow auditors to come in and ensure that the framework that we put together is actually being followed. And this becomes the foundation of our assurance certifications. For example, our HIPAA compliance and our SOC 2 Type 2 certification. All of these pillars that I mentioned and these points that fall under them become the basis and the framework for meeting those standards.
Great, thanks, Evan. And I think it's really important to think about those three key pillars when you're assessing a technology solution. And I know we're joined today by people both on the technology side of the business, people from IT, as well as the businesses themselves. And I think it's important for those of you who are responsible for part of the business are aware of some of these common terms that are used when we talk about security and compliance within the technology space. As there's been this industry shift into cloud computing and having enterprises really being able to focus on what they're really good at doing and adding innovation and technology to their core businesses and not having to worry about so much about sort of the underlying piping of their business systems and the security and compliance associated with those, it's up to vendors like us to be able to provide you a great system. But as a business buyer of software technology, it's important that you're informed of how we think about this in this space and how the industry talks about security and compliance. So the Zinc solution itself really comes down to a few key components. First of all of our team communication capability. So this includes one-to-one and group messaging, voice and video calling, push-to-talk capabilities. So again, this whole notion of how do you provide multiple modes of communication across a single app, as well as this notion of being able to broadcast out to many people within an organization and being able to do all of that within a single app. So it makes it nice and easy for the users. They don't have to jump around to different places. It's a very common way to be able to use the overall application. Being able to give you analytics to provide insight as to what's going on within the actual usage of the platform itself. Sophisticated administration controls, which we'll do a little bit of a demo on, and as well, all these foundational capabilities that Evan talked about in terms of the certification and the compliance that really allows us to provide this secure and compliant platform for you to use safely within the enterprise. And of course, we run across a whole host of platforms from the mobile side with Android and iOS, as well as native applications both on Windows and Mac, as well as web-based interfaces too. So it makes it really easy to deploy across the entire organization. Just going into a little bit of detail here, lots of capability under each of these individual sections. But what I want to do right now is actually bring up our administrative interface to give you a little bit of a tour of how things work. So what I want to do here is, first of all, just jump into our official group structure. So groups are a way that you can create secure conversations and you can centrally administer adding people into those conversations or into those conversations. What's also important is that people who are members of those conversations, they can also add other people to those conversations as well if they want. And what we find is we've struck this really nice balance between allowing the grassroots teams to form on their own, while at the same time providing top-down oversight into those groups that are being created. So let me just drill in here quickly. You can see a team. I could add new teams into this, or I could drill into, let's go take a look at Amy's teams. I can see all the people that are in Amy's teams. Let's go take a look at Gerald here and specifically what he's doing. So I noticed that Gerald isn't an administrator currently in this organization, but he's a member of multiple groups. And so I can see what actual official groups that he is a part of. And this is something from a security and oversight point of view, you start to now understand who has access to different information and who's talking in different groups. Another piece to highlight is these different roles scenarios. So let me just enable this here. So you can see that we actually have three different roles that a user can take on. They can just be a normal user, which is not one of the defined roles, or we can actually give them broadcast rights. Broadcasting capability is this idea where I can broadcast from one to many people. So this is someone who now has the authority granted to them to send information out to lots of people all in one shot. And of course, you want that to be a restricted capability, so not everyone in the organization can communicate en masse to everyone else. We also then have this team admin, so you can start to delegate some of the administration of some of these, your teams to other people. And then of course, an organization admin that has then full access to the overall platform and is the super administrator of the overall platform. They also have access to the analytics and can configure things like Active Directory controls as well. Then if we take a look at actually the group settings themselves, let's go into one of those official groups again, and go take a look at Amy's team, and I'm going to go into the settings here. You'll notice some interesting things here where I can actually choose to say, I want this group to be a restricted group, which means only the administrators can change the membership of that group. Or if I want to be a little bit more ad hoc with the group, I can remove the restricted editing from those groups. And now people who are members of those groups are granted the trust to be able to add and remove the necessary people from those groups. Since we work with this centralized user administration capability, I'm not going to save these, we also have the ability for you to see all the people that are actually connected into your Zinc organization. You can add other people into that organization very quickly to be able to then make them part of your environment. And for those of you that work in, say, a construction industry where maybe you've got a lot of subcontractors, you can actually make subcontractors part of your organization as well. We can be replicating, maybe you have corporate users or permanent staff that are in your Active Directory. Those can be replicated into Zinc. And then external contractors can be manually added into your organization, and you can add and remove them as necessary and as appropriate. Then in our settings, we also have the ability to have you control the organization, and as well, this clear setting is a key piece that Evan was talking about around the data retention, which allows you to be able to actually choose how long you're going to keep the data for yourself. We also have the ability to, for certain enterprise customers, to actually extract message data, so then you can archive it if you want, or of course, if Zinc can save that message data forever, and then you always have access to it. And finally, just to quickly show the analytics piece, I now, as an administrator, and I'm a super administrator, I can see how many groups do I have, what's the activity in those groups. Here's a weather safety alerts group. Here's a tech support help team that's very active. So not only can I see the official groups, but I can also see ad hoc conversations that people have actually created. So then I can understand what's the broader use of the platform across my organization, what are the topics that people are talking about, and what's actually happening in some of those groups. So now I get the supervisory view of all of the activity that's going on within the platform. Again, helping you maintain security and compliance to make sure that all the right things are happening in the platform and people are using the platform in the way that it was designed to do that meets with your corporate IT standards. So that gives you just a little tour of some of the capabilities that we have from an administrative functionality, which is really a powerful and unique capability that we have, differentiating us in a great deal from a lot of the consumer applications that you have. So what we thought we'd do is actually, let's just talk a little bit here, Evan, as we're getting to the tail end of the session here. So we talked a little bit about this whole consumer app, but we hear, oh, consumer apps are secure. Probably some of you are familiar with this whole delete Facebook movement that's happened recently, and there's a concern over what corporations are actually doing with this data. What are some of the other things that people need to think about if they have consumer apps deployed in their environment?
Sure, absolutely. So I touched on a few of these earlier, but let's dig a little deeper and do just some thought experiments. So you as an organization, you have very important content and intellectual property that's vital to your business, and some of it may be sensitive. As soon as that information is shared in a consumer app, it's basically left the boundaries that you've defined as an organization, and it's gone outside of your knowledge. It actually could be anywhere. But in particular, if you have content that you have in your sanctioned knowledge portals like Dropbox, Box, or SharePoint, if an employee in their attempts to be efficient wants to share that information on a consumer app, now it's not only on say, their device. If you have a bring your own device policy, it may be on another user's device. They may have accidentally shared it with one of their personal contacts. And none of those apps or devices are really under your control or visibility. So basically, as soon as your content and your information hits those consumer apps, it's kind of a Wild West. And then, as I mentioned before, when an employee leaves, there's no way of knowing what's on that device or that app, and there's no way for you to easily turn off access to that information or revoke access to that data, because it really is stored on a consumer platform at that point. So there's a large potential for data breaches, information breaches, and potentially detrimental exposure to your confidential company information, simply because you don't have that control and that visibility over those platforms.
All right, interesting. Yeah, some good things for people to consider. And specifically, I know we've got some healthcare companies on the phone today, and we talked a little bit about HIPAA. Can you just tell a little bit about what someone who would be a customer of Zinc, what they need to think about in terms of working with us in a HIPAA regulated environment?
Sure. So HIPAA really defines controls over how patient health information can be shared and can be stored. And it's actually fairly restrictive for a good reason. It's very sensitive information. What we've decided to do at Zinc is actually specify where we want to become HIPAA compliant as far as the Zinc platform is concerned, and that way we can provide the best experience for all of our users. And so the process basically looks like this. If you're a healthcare company, you'd like to become HIPAA compliant and make sure that you're using Zinc in a HIPAA compliant way, contact us. We'll discuss the process with you and how we can do this best with you. And then we actually want to make sure we get a BAA in place. BAA stands for Business Associate Agreement. And that basically defines what we commit to do with the data that you give us, and then your responsibility as well as a healthcare organization using Zinc. And so part of that is agreeing to make sure you use Zinc in the proper way so that you don't accidentally expose patient health information. If that happens, then obviously there would be a liability there. So that's kind of what the BAA covers.
All right, that's great. So I see we're wrapping to the bottom of the hour here. And so what I want to do is just turn things back over to Nicole to just give everyone a little bit of next steps as to how they can learn more about Zinc.
Yeah, and certainly feel free to submit a question if you have them, where we'll get those answered here in the last minute. But just wanting to make you all aware, we have additional resources beyond this webcast. I think a great place to go next would be to look at the Zinc blog, which if you go to zinc.it, you can navigate to that. And we have some recent topics that drill into the security topics some more, and actually how you can sort of do an audit of what communication apps your team may be using, and just more around security and things to consider. So I encourage you to take a look at that, to take a look at our blog, and always check back there. Obviously, if you have specific questions or want to talk to somebody on our team, we have the phone number here, and can send a Zinc, actually, go into the application and contact us that way as well. So just taking a look here, it looks like we do have one question, and this one has to do with the disaster tolerance, and I think you mentioned that. So what kind of uptime do we provide to our customers?
Sure, I can answer that. So we're actually very proud of our track record. We provide a 99.9% uptime guarantee. We actually have in the past gone far beyond that. We take it very seriously. In fact, for example, with the exception of a 5-minute period, which we had in January, to basically handle the meltdown inspector vulnerabilities that you might have heard of recently, we've actually maintained 100% uptime over the last quarter, the last 3 months. So this is something that we take very seriously. We put a lot of investment into, and we do provide that guarantee for you as an SLA in our contract.
But also it's part of status.zinc.it as a fully published uptime. You can see our uptime, you can see our response time. It's sort of what needs to be done as a responsible enterprise SaaS provider is being open and transparent with our uptime and our performance, because it's a commitment that we're making to you as a customer that we live up to.
Okay, great. So we're going to conclude our webcast at this point. Thank you, John and Evan, for taking us through the presentation today. I think a lot of good information and hopefully some things for those of you on the phone to think about and consider, what your next move may be within your own company. So thanks for taking the time to join us today, and look forward to you joining us on a future Zinc webcast. Have a good afternoon.